People know. All right. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Concy Pedroza. How are you? I'm the superintendent of Tukwila School District. For those of you who know me or don't know me, I know that last time we were here, we had over 30 people in the room. I just want to make sure that if there's people who need translations, that we give access to that in this meeting. This meeting is a repeat of the last meeting. So if you were here at the last meeting, it's just a repeat. We're just repeating the same offering of conversation. First, I want to thank everyone for being here. I know that many of you are here on your night off. We have a lot of events going on and you're here to engage with us. So I want to thank everyone for being here. And the purpose of this meeting is just to have an opportunity to discuss and try to answer questions around Tukwila School District's current climate situation in terms of fiscal, the budget, and just provide some open communication and community input on some of the processes that have been happening and the impacts. So the outline for this meeting is we're going to do an overview of the current fiscal situation. We're going to explain some of the challenging budgetary constraints and challenges that we're facing. And we're going to talk about potential solutions and strategies. And then we'll open it up to questions and answers. We have a hard stop at 7:30, so we will stop at 7:30 at that time. So all right, I'm going to pass this to our CFO, Amy Fleming. All right.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Amy Fleming. I'm the CFO for the district. I want to start off by explaining a little bit how school districts in the state of Washington are funded. So basically, our revenue sources come from three primary buckets. They would be our state funding. And our state funding is really interesting because it's based on the number of annual average FTE of our students, not headcount. So that creates the first challenge because we always have more students sitting in seats than the actual average annual FTE. And there's various reasons why a student may be absent and then doesn't get counted in the normal monthly enrollment count. So between the funding from the state for enrollment plus some other state grants that we receive, that bucket of money is about 65% of our overall revenue that we receive. Then we get, thankfully our voters are kind and pass our property tax levy. And so we assess the taxes through property taxes. We call that local levy funding. And that supplies us about 13% of our revenue. So that gives us the ability to, hire those additional teachers. Then last, we get federal grants from various sources. And this, because of the pandemic, has been pretty significant for Tukwila. It's been running at about 20%. Now, part of our challenge is that with the loss of our most recent funding called ESSER, it was funding that was provided to us by the federal government through the COVID-19 pandemic. That funding ends by the federal government this August. And so it will not continue, and that's a significant loss for us. On the expenditure side, of course, we pay teachers, we pay our support staff, our custodial, our food service, and as well as, we keep our buildings open. So we have to pay for all of the utilities associated with those buildings, our insurance, supplies and materials, repairs and maintenance, to have our buildings look good. And so with the loss of revenue, plus the increase in expenses due to inflation. I think you hear it on the news all over the place, especially, and you see it probably in your own pocketbook when you go to the grocery store. Costs are increasing. And so that dynamic has also been a challenge for Tukwila. With the overview, climate. So what has happened in the past is enrollment for the district historically over the last 3 years, this year is an anomaly, but over the last 3 years has been in decline. And unfortunately, decisions were made and staffing wasn't adjusted as a result of that loss of enrollment. And so the district burned through their savings account pretty quickly, and unfortunately found that when we were closing the books, that they were actually in a negative situation. So in order to get us right-sized, OSPI is called in and placed us in what is called binding conditions. And so they have provided now more significant oversight. And we are required to meet with them on a quarterly basis to give them our plan on how we are going to get ourselves right-sized. In accordance with those binding conditions, what happens is we are required by law to come up with a plan to get out of those binding conditions, and we have 2 years to do so. Well, unfortunately, as of August 31st, 2023, we started our first year of binding conditions. So we have until the end of next fiscal year to get to a zero fund balance. And so that's facing right now. And what we were working through as we are trying to develop our budget for the 24-25 school year. Dr. Pedroza, is there anything you want to add on that respect?
I hit the recording pause button by mistake instead of my mute button. So there we go, technology. Just a couple of things. So one of the things we've been doing, we've been trying to communicate since early September about some of the budget constraints. As soon as we have information, we've been sending letters to families and to staff. We started that in September. We've gone to staff meetings. I just want to also let people know that there's been some questions in our community about, so why did we, for example, fund the levy? Why did we, put all our efforts into the levy? Well, we want to thank all the members and staff who helped and supported our levy dollars, because actually, if we didn't pass the levy, our situation would have been much more challenging, and we would have had to make actually even more drastic cuts, as some of the other districts surrounding us are doing right now, because they did not pass their levies. And so we are thankful for that, but that didn't help completely our situation. So I just wanted to make sure that that was really clear. Another thing I just want to also add is I was asked last Thursday, about an organizational chart, and I couldn't remember all the details of that information. And so I'm just going to correct that statement. Just in last week's meeting, I was asked about an organizational chart, and I just shared some incorrect information, which I'm going to correct. What happened was I sent a communication letter to TEA leadership to review related to the phase 1 non-renewal process for language accuracy. And then the TEA leadership actually gave us suggestions on what we should be prioritizing in terms of the letter, but they never suggested holding back the organizational chart. They just wanted to make sure that our focus in our communication was on the impact of staffing cuts within the building. Anyway, so I did promise at the last meeting that I would be sending a district administration org chart before the end of the year, and I will still do that. So I just wanted to make sure I cleared that information up. And then I can't think of anything else, but Amy, did you want to add anything that I might have forgotten?
Yeah, so I did a really high level overview of just kind of how we're funded. I do want to point you to the board documents on our website. There was a presentation at the January 30th board work session that was co-presented by members from the Puget Sound ESD, as well as the interim CFO at that time, just to talk about how we're funded and what that looks like. And so if you're interested in reviewing that, you can go to the January 30th board work session. The PowerPoint presentations and I believe the recording are both online. And so if you ever want to know or want more information on that, you can easily find it there.
And then I just want to, in the chat, Ms. Berto, our Director of Communications, put in, that's the budget information sheet we've been giving to families. Amy and I have gone to all of the school communities and talked about the budget, and we talked with our parent advisory groups, as many parent groups as we can, and some of our community-based organizations, and we've handed out this sheet at all of them. And we do want to make sure that that just has a little high-level explanation of some of the budget and some of the percentages and how we fund our budget. So with that, I know there's some questions that came up last time. And I'm trying to remember all of them. And if I do, I will try to answer, I'll try to repeat that in this session. But if anyone has any questions for us right now, you can go ahead and raise your hand and we'll call on you to answer any of your questions. Well, what I'll do is I'll go ahead. We have a FAQ sheet and I will go through that. And then while we wait, do I see one hand up? No, I don't see any hands up, but I'll go ahead and answer a few questions that were sent to us at various times throughout our board meetings and our board sessions. And just answer what I do know. One of the questions that we've had is how are administrative costs being managed in comparison to cuts in educational programs. And we are trying to make sure that all of our administrative costs and our internal processes are being scrutinized. We're analyzing everything and we're trying to reduce alongside all of our educational programs. We are really trying to make sure that also all of our payroll and our accounting are all up to date and timely, and to ensure that we have proper time in terms of timely paying of all of our expenses. Robin, I see your hand is up. Do you have a question?
I do, thank you. I'm wondering, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm wondering, I see that we have a bid, or we did have a bid up for the food service department that closed on the 29th, I believe. I'm wondering, what is the state doing? I mean, I'd heard rumblings quite a while ago that the state was looking at funding districts who are, high poverty for free and reduced lunch. I mean, free lunches like we've had all along during the pandemic. Do we know where that stands? Or, I mean, do we know if that's going to happen? Like the state's going to cover that, or are families going to go back again to apply whether they'll be free or reduced lunches?
I know that that's one of the commitments from the legislative session. We have to go back and look at that. As far as we know, there's no changes into next year. We haven't received any major changes, but we'll go back and look at that. Amy, do you have any information on that?
No, my understanding is that we are continuing to provide free breakfast and lunch to all students in this district. And I don't anticipate any changes into next year as a result.
Oh, okay, great, thank you.
But we will follow up and make sure that we have that accurate. Okay. Thank you, Robin, for the question. Are there any other questions? One of the questions that was asked from the last meeting is how can the community play a role in supporting the district during this financial time? One of the things that I think is really important is attending information sessions like this. Learning. I see that our director, Dave Larson, is here. He's been part of several op-eds for the Seattle Times and working with them. And he's done some presentations at the state legislative session, trying to educate even the people who are making our laws and our policies and our all of the decisions related to our budget. He's been doing some presentations at the state level. I think it's very important that we all learn about and where we can influence decisions around the budget. Many of us are involved in associations, but I think it's a collective we that needs to go down there, not just from a Tukwila viewpoint, but from our WA, from our WASA, from our WASDA, all of our groups that we're part of. We need to start really paying attention to what they're advocating for. I've had conversations with several people from the superintendents and really talking to them about, because right now what the funding model is, it's all based on enrollment, right? Which is everything the same type of model. And they figure that they will get equity in through LAP or title or other ways to help with equity. But as we all know, our kids that come to us have many, many, many needs. And we try to support them through our McKinney-Vento funding. We try to support them through title funding, through LAP funding, through multilingual, bilingual funding. But it doesn't, sometimes it just doesn't meet all their needs. And so we need to do some advocating at the state level, especially now, because we're going to be in a major talking about the budget during this legislative session coming up. And the time to talk to your lawmakers is now, to start talking to them now, and then start learning and seeing where you can advocate. I think that's one of the things that we can do. I just want to make sure, I know Director Larson, you're here. Do you mind adding anything about that, if you don't mind? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Sure, yeah, it's really important to let our legislators know, particularly the ones from the 11th district. So that's Senator Hasagawa, Representative Berquist, Representative Hackney, that we need a funding system that is funds based on student need, not just this flat per student rate that Dr. Barroso has talked about. We really need one that's a lot more funded based on student need, because that's what we need and to adequately support in our students. So yeah, I encourage everybody to contact our state legislators and let them know that.
Amy, do you have anything to add? No.
Nothing else to add. The other interesting thing too is that some of our federal grants that we receive are based on data from 2 years ago. And so I feel like we're always playing some catch up as far as some of the funding that we receive. So we have immediate needs now with some of our students. But the funding that we get is based on enrollment that we had 2 years ago. And so that's a bit of a challenge at the federal level that we probably need to start working with Congress on a bit to maybe change that model for funding as
well. Yep. All right. So I just saw in the chat that's one of the links is not connecting. And so Naomi Berto is going to be fixing that. All right. Are there any other questions for us in this and related to the budget?
I mean, I'm sorry I just joined because I was stuck on the other room that didn't work. So could you catch me up real quick? Are we in financial trouble next year? I know a lot of schools are. It was in the Seattle Times that Tukwila was called out as having a struggle. I know we've taken a lot of refugee children in at the same time. Does that help us? Do we get funding for that? Does that offset some of the losses? Is it because we spent too much during COVID and didn't readjust? Or how do we get to this pickle? There's also that question.
That's a good question. I think it's complex, right? We got here through many, many different ways. One, the overall trending in the district, and then it's not our case for this year, but it's in the past, there was enrollment adjustments that had to be made. We've had a declining enrollment. This year we've had the upswing, but we have an upswing of students with a high level of needs. There is overspending, right? So we've actually planned for some budget items, and we actually do not have all of the necessary funding sources to pay what we have contracted out and provide services for. There's some of that. There's also some internal controls we're looking at, making sure we're looking at all the things that we're doing. And then the bottom line is, I think there's inadequate funding, right? Just inadequate funding from the state level. It uses a funding formula that is not based on, it's not student need based, it's based on every student's exactly the same. And as we know, some of our students, while we do get extra funding to support some of our students, it's not adequate. It's not adequate. For example, I'll share one example of that is our homeless population. We have the same amount of money that we received, and it's sort of incrementally increased over time, but our numbers have doubled. We have doubled. So our numbers have doubled. We now are at 20%, where 20% of our students are homeless. And so that is a huge impact on the system. We have a larger number of multilingual learners and so forth. And so it's a very complex issue. So our job is to ensure that we are correcting all of those pieces as with the parameters that the state's giving us. The state has, by law, it says we're supposed to be adequately ample funding for our community. Ample is a key word, and I would say many districts around us would not say we're there yet. And that's what we were talking about, the work we can do as advocacy from the parent group, from the teacher lens, from the superintendent lens, from the fiscal lens, from the board lens, all the ways that we can advocate to make sure that we have not only ample funding, but equity in funding equitable funding for our students, because we're asking for ample and equitable funding for our kids. But we can always work on our internal pieces and making sure that we're, living within our means. That's something that everyone has to do. So that's something we're working on as well. I hope that answers your question.
And to add to that a little bit too is, you didn't hear the first part, I'm explaining that, inflation obviously is hitting everybody. It's hitting personal lives, but it's also hitting school districts. And so inflation has really had a big dent. Our utility costs have increased, our insurance, to cover our buildings and, our vehicles and things of that nature have skyrocketed. And so those are some other areas too that have become a challenge. And it's not just Tukwila, it's across the state. We are not funded sufficiently in those areas. And so we have a little family friendly sheet, and a couple of things that I can point out is that, we pay about $590,000 out of our local levy because the district doesn't fund us just for insurance. And so that really adds up over time. So that plays into, some of the challenges that we're facing as school districts across the state.
What does that mean? The district doesn't fund us just for insurance? Are you saying they don't fund adequately
the
for
state
insurance?
the state does not adequately fund us for insurance, as an example.
Oh, ever, or just now
Ever.
because it's doubled?
Ever. No, ever. Yeah. We're paying $590,000 above and beyond what the state allocates to us at Tukwila. That's just insurance.
Yeah, no, I'm sure others have the same predicament where my own insurance doubled this year, right?
Correct. Right.
So if you want, I think I heard Mr. Larson mention, advocate with your representatives. Are you doing anything to help us in that advocacy? Do you have template letters? Do you have people we should be reaching out to? Is there a site we should be going to? How are you enabling us to be successful in this request?
I think that's a great question. And right now we have our director of communications also listening. We can publish that. We can publish that information. We can publish our legislative information. I'm going to be sending a community letter at the end of this month, in the middle of this month, about just sort of updating our families and our staff around what the goals are moving forward and where we are. So I think that's really good feedback for us. One of the things that we can, I'm learning myself, right, and learning how to advocate. I had a meeting just today with one of our federal folks, with Adam Smith, Representative Adam Smith. So he and I met today to talk about what he can do at the federal level, right, to support, because McKinney-Vento is under the federal government, and there's other things like that. And so what I'm doing is I'm having meetings with people, and I'm trying to advocate. I have another meeting. I know Representative Bergquist has met with us, and that's part of the reason why some of the ARIA funding from the Office of Refugee and Immigrations came around as a grant. So people are listening to us. People are wanting to hear how they can help. I think it's just a matter of, us doing this as with a larger voice, right? I don't think it can just come from one person. I know that Director Larson is also advocating and calling people and talking to folks as well. And I'm meeting with our local superintendents because we're not the only district going through this. In fact, I just got reached out from yesterday from the superintendent of Yakima saying, hey, Concy, how are you doing? So, we're trying to help each other out, but we also need to advocate collectively at the different levels. So that's good information for us. So we can talk about how parents and staff what they can do or who they can call or who our representatives are to call. So I think that is good information for us so that we can support that at that level. So
feel like you
I'm
want
sure,
to
I think, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I feel like you probably want a consistent message.
Right.
So if you draft up a message or a collection of messages,
Yeah.
and help us to help you, you'll probably get more support. Right?
That's great. Thank you. Are there any other questions for us here in this meeting?
Did we talk about have you made decisions about what's not happening from, as a parent of children in the school district, we learned that we were losing a lot of teachers, right?
Yeah.
And some good teachers, definitely. Not that they're not all good, but some definitely shine, right?
Yeah.
So are we expecting other things to fall by the wayside as well? Are we losing programs and resources that kids take advantage of now?
Yeah, so we're going to be announcing some of those. So on next, so I'm going to be sending a letter out explaining some of those things, but we've already shared some of that. I'll give an example of some of the things we've shared. So what we're trying to do is not try as much as we can to not impact the student experience, right? So one of the things is maintaining class sizes. So we're monitoring that. We're making sure that our class sizes are being monitored all summer long. As we've all heard, I think if you look at the news, we have some of our families that are, that I believe were some of our families that are now in Kent, and they've lost their housing in the hotels. And so they're trying to find, that's been in the news lately. So we're kind of wondering what's happening with those families. Some of our families will choose to move their student to a district that if they have more permanent housing, that is a choice that they have to move to either Kent or Highline or Renton, or Seattle, if that is where they're at. So we are trying to monitor that as close as we can, which is why we had to look at averages in terms of enrollment numbers. So that's one piece, because the one thing we don't want to be in September and October is overstaffed, because we are in binding conditions, we have to ensure that we aren't over budgeting in the fall. So that's one of the things that we're considering, and we're working really closely with enrollment offices in our surrounding districts. The other student experience pieces that we're looking at, there were some things that were funded through ESSER. And so those are things we had to look at very critically. So one example of that is social workers, right? Social workers were funded through ESSER. And so, but we did move social workers back into our general fund to support our elementary students. So social workers will remain, but that meant that we had to make a decision about other staff. For example, I know some staff we lost SEL teachers and we lost intervention specialists and so forth. How it's done is it's done through seniority. So we have an agreement with the union. So when we make those decisions to move a couple positions around or eliminate a position, then that is done through seniority. And then we have our human resource office work through that process with staff. And so unfortunately, some of the newer staff members who we've just hired and recruited in the last 2 to 3 years, many of them were the ones that were not renewed moving forward, or were part of the reduction in force. So that is unfortunate. Our hope is that through the recall process, if we get more students that come back than we anticipated, our hope is that we can bring back our students into school, and that we can bring back our teachers to support the students into our school. And so that's the goal, is that if there is a need, we will start doing the recall process and start hiring back, if they're available, some of the teachers that we have had to do this process with. So that's how it works. It's definitely not, it's definitely an emotional process. I know that a lot of people have a lot of feelings, and every building in our system has been impacted in some heavy way. And that is a very challenging situation, and it's pretty hard to explain to children as well, having been in this situation before in previous roles. I see that Sharon Moon has a question.
Hi, thank you. I hear that it's really difficult. It's difficult for everyone. And I heard that you're putting the ESSER funds back for elementary schools for social workers. What about for the high school?
So yeah, it's not ESSER funds. What we did is our ESSER funds are going away. So at the end of August, they're done. So we won't have that funding source anymore. That's about, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, 5.4 million. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty close.
Pretty close, a little over maybe 5.4 million, between 5.4 and 5.6. So that funding source is gone. We had 18 staff positions that were funded in that. And so we had to make some critical decisions about what we were going to keep. At the secondary level, the social workers will not be in the middle and high school. It'll be but the guidance counselors are all still going to remain in the building. So all the academic and guidance counselors remain in the building. So those were some of the decisions that were made at the middle and the high school in relation to that. And another example is we had some contracts through the ESSER funds. So for example, we had a lot of after school and before school programming. Some of you may have experienced Innovations, Champions, All Stars. They're all ending at different times throughout the year. But one of the things we're doing is we're bringing next year Boys and Girls Club to Tukwila. It's at no cost to the district. They have scholarships for students who need them, and they will be housed at all of our elementary schools. And we're trying to figure out what the middle school program may look like. So that's what we're in talks right now, talking to them about. But right now they're going to be in, we have an MOA for all of them to be in our elementary schools, but it'll be at no cost to the district, and it'll be a self funding before and after school care. And then we are going to be offering some clubs after school from City of Tukwila. And so they will be offering, I believe, some robotics, some STEM type clubs, academic clubs after school in the afternoons at all of the elementary schools as well. So that's just an example of something we had to eliminate, but we've been trying to work really hard to find another thing that we can bring in there that actually it's not the exact same experience, but it's a similar experience. Another example is when we cut the budget for 5th grade camp, for example, but we then went and reached out and looked for a grant. And so next year, 5th grade camp is funded for all of our 5th graders. And we got the full funding for the camp from outdoor education. So all of our 5th graders will be going to camp. So we're working really hard to ensure that our students' experiences will not be as impacted. Of course, there'll be some impacts, but we're trying hard to make sure that all the things that are great about school are still happening. There'll still be PE, there'll still be all of those things that we know from our school experiences. You'll still have a classroom with teachers, with some paraeducators in the building, your principal, all of those fundamental things will still be in place. In the secondary level, there'll be some elimination of some programming. There was some talk at one of our board meetings around our theater program. So we're looking at what we can do instead to support theater at Foster High School and so forth. So those are things that we're working on right now.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that last few minutes. If I
Yeah.
go way back to what you were saying early on,
Yeah.
it sounded like you said we have students in Kent that maybe have housing problems, maybe they might get housing, and possibly they'll move outside of district. I didn't know Kent was in our district to start with, but maybe.
No, it's not
maybe
in
they
our
were-
district. Sorry, it's outside of our district, but we have kids that are, because they're homeless, we are obligated to actually, they can stay in our district and get schooled and educated in our district. And we, as a district, have to provide transportation to get them back and forth to their home, wherever
see.
their home is. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
once
I'm
they get
glad you
permanent
asked that
housing,
question so I could clarify that.
once they get permanent housing, they would go to that school district.
If they
Are-
choose to, if they
if-
choose to. Yeah.
And then the follow-up comment to that was you said something about you know, we want to make sure we have the right allocation of teachers to students. Do you feel like we have classes that have undersized classes right now?
We have a few classes that are under, we have a few that are over. We have that, we have that at the high school level, we've had that, but we do have some classes that have gone over. In the fall, we were definitely, I would say we did have capacity to fill in some of our classrooms. We try to monitor, and then we work with our union partnerships to make sure that we don't go over, and then we have a process in place if our classrooms do go oversized. So we try to make sure that we are obligated, especially in K-1-2 education, we are obligated to keep our enrollment, our staff to student ratio down as much as we can, especially if we receive funds to support smaller class sizes in our early programming.
I have another question, but I'll wait because Rob wants to.
Okay, go ahead, Rob, and then we'll go back.
That's okay. But I'm wondering about library. I know that at elementary levels, we have cut the libraries. But I think I heard you say at a board meeting that you were looking, and maybe I was misunderstood, so I want to clarify it, that you're looking at maybe having some like ESPs work in the library, or so what exactly is happening with our libraries? I mean, or what is being looked as an alternative for that, since there won't be a teacher there? Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Sorry, I'm at the tail end of a cough. So what's going to happen is for this coming year, and of course, I hope we can one day be back with full, loving, you know, libraries are central spaces, and I recognize that. What we're looking at is bringing back, they're called, remind me of the technical term. Amy, can you remind me the technical term that we call them? Is it library technicians?
I think so.
Yeah, I think it's library techs.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're gonna bring library techs into the building. So they're the ones that it's classified position, and they're gonna be the ones that are gonna be, you know, checking out the books, supporting teachers that bring their kids into the library, and they'll be helping shelve the books and making sure that at least technically that the building is orderly and not, you know, because one of the things is we know that there's beautiful collections in there. We want to maintain our collections. Our goal is that once we get back into, you know, fiscal health, that we can then reanalyze all of these pieces and look and see where we can bring back what we need, what we can through this process, and where we can do that. Naomi, you had your hand up.
Yes, I just want to bring to your attention a question that's in the chat box from
Okay.
Karen.
Yes, has the district considered furlough days for district's administration staff? I believe that was mentioned as a possibility. Yes, we are talking about it. One of the things we're trying to do is look at that and see what we can do. And so those are things we're talking about, furlough days. We're talking about even minimizing travel. I know we're doing that somewhat right now. We're scrutinizing every grant that we get, because we're trying to make sure that if we get a grant, if we have to commit funding to that grant, so right now we have to sort of long-term plan if there's extra commitments from the district, because sometimes not all grants are really free grants. And so we're doing that. So we have an internal process for that. So actually the process is basically me and Ms. Fleming are the final approvers of all those grants, because we have to make sure that we can actually afford those things. We are actively seeking grants. So we did apply for the Raya grant, for the Outdoor and Education grant. We're working on our safety net applications. So there's the state funding grants that we're trying to apply for, as well as other grants that come along either through the legislative session or through other means. And so we're doing our best to find that. But I will say we don't have a grant writer at all. And I know that came up, but I can't at this time, I can't hire a grant writer. So I do have an idea from a parent that wanted to think about starting a grant committee. And if there's some people that want to think about how we can do that, that would be great. But we need to make sure that we work in coordination with us and our processes, because again, not all grants are great grants. I mean, sometimes you have grants that people like, we'll give you all of this, but we're the main source that's going to provide you all the materials, so you have those types of grants too. So we're trying to watch that very carefully and make sure it's really serving our students.
I don't know if I
Right.
can raise my hand again or not, but
No, go ahead and ask your question. It's fine.
it's
I know,
shrub.
I know, and
Straight up
that
shrub.
is hard because so I will say, I thank you for engaging with us because we have other families here that are here for the first time, right? I think there's a few people of names I don't recognize, and they probably want to ask a question. The staff has been dealing with this more since January and really been dealing with this from a staff level since really in the last few months for sure. And so they're a little bit ahead. And some people were here last week as well. So that's fine. I think your questions are probably helping a few others that maybe are just trying to really grapple and understand. So no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I have two questions. First one is, can you give me some perspective on what our gap is? Meaning, we have a budget gap of X. Percentage wise, are we 20% under our budget? Are we 50% under our budget? What are we missing 100 million, but we really have $500 million budget? What
I'm
is
going to
the
have Amy
perspective?
answer that. She can be more, she can give you the precise answer. Yeah.
So are you wanting to know what our budget gap is rolling into next year, or what kind of the budget gap current year?
I suppose both. I mean, they're both relevant, right? One is like, I didn't know we had a budget gap now, but I did read about it in the paper, and I assume you're saying projected to have a budget gap next year.
Yeah,
those-
so part
those
of
two
the
things are-
work that we have to do is undertake looking at where our revenues are currently, where our expenditures are projected to be, what that looks like. And so we have a projected gap going into the end of this year, and our year end is August 31st. So we're not on a calendar year. Is projected to be anywhere between, I've been having a lot of conversations with the board, projecting to be $3.5 million to $4.3 million. And so that is our projection of being in the hole. Revenues less than expenditures. That's for this year.
And
yes,
for perspective, if it's 3.4 million, but our budget is 500 million, then I go,
no,
well,
it's not 500 million. We only have like a $63 million budget.
so that gives you a percentage idea.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
so it's a pretty significant percentage if you look at that. If we were to do nothing next year, I did do a presentation to the board, and I can't recall which board meeting it was, but I did a presentation, and one of my slides showed what it would look like if we did nothing. So if we just rolled over our revenues, and we know that revenues aren't keeping pace with our spend at all. And I think I've said that we do have a little bit of an increase anticipated next year from our state, but our federal is going away. So revenues are actually declining for us next year because of the loss of ESSER funds. And so we're projecting right now at about 57.5 million for our revenues. If I were to roll over our expenditures and apply the inflationary rates, our gap next year jumps up to like $20 million.
because right now it's like a 6%.
Yeah, so it is absolutely significant. And now that assumes that we did nothing. That assumes that we just took that information and just rolled it forward. Now, of course, we can't operate that way. And so that is why we're in the situation of having to make these reductions in order to get to, this financial stability.
Because that will be a 30% gap, right?
Yeah.
If I look at those numbers, if I just try to quickly do the math in my head, I think it's
Right.
something like 6, something like 30.
Right.
If we don't do anything, it gets to 30.
Yes.
So the second comment is really around how challenging it is I find, to donate money to the school district to things I want to give to, because there's not a central nonprofit. So I don't know what other people in the community, but for my employer, I'm allowed to donate money and it will be matched by my employer. I've tried to do that for the high school program, and that money's been lost. I can't get it. I've worked on it for 6 months. It's not a huge amount. It's not going to make that 6% by any means. But it's just one of those things where, like, if we see some things that our kids are involved in, and the teacher, the theater guy, the sport guy says, I'm a little short, can we help me out? You're not making it easy for me to do that.
Right.
Yeah, it's
And
something we talked about. Go ahead, Amy, sorry.
yeah, so Benevity, I know, I think I know what you're talking about. You're working through your organization that contributes through Benevity. And unfortunately, Benevity for us is really hard to work with. And so for us we've been trying to get in touch with somebody from Benevity to get this set up properly and get these situations resolved. And I feel like it takes months and months and months when we work with them. In my prior organization, we had the same issue with them. And they're it's great. But it just takes time for us to work through whatever was set up incorrectly. To unwind that is super difficult with this organization for some reason, and I'm not sure why.
Somebody in the chat just said, hey, try your PTA. And to be honest, when my kids were at Thorndike, I did the PTA thing through Benevity and it worked. And like, oh, that was easy. I'll just keep doing that. And when they got to high school, I'm like, oh, I'll do it through that. Because I thought I found it. The other follow-up comment is, we have some resources we're not taking. Maybe I shouldn't say that. There potentially are some opportunities to leverage our kids, right? So
Yep.
I think about like, we've never had a fundraiser, right? So we've never had like, bring all the parents in and, raffle off these things or whatever. We've never done it because we've never had the resources, but we're in Tukwila surrounded by companies that would love to say, we donated to this school, that organization, or that thing. And you have parents that would participate in that event, a fundraiser of sorts. And I feel like there's also, a thing at the high school where they're teaching business classes, and one of them is how to run a business. Fundraising is a business. And I wonder about like, well, could you work with the teacher to make this into a tangible thing kids do? And how fantastic would that be from a experience perspective? I raised $1,000. Looks great in your resume. I raised $10,000, whatever. But maybe you see where I'm going with that.
Yeah, no, I think that's something we've talked about. I'm on the Tukwila Children's Foundation, and that's something we've talked about is like having that foundation, right? To support to bring in a foundation to support money just for the school district directly. So that's something we've talked about because other districts have it, like, Bellevue Foundation, things like that. So that's something we talked about. And the other thing I'm interested to is looking at long-term, thinking of we have a lot of around us, like the Renton Promise and Tacoma Promise and Seattle Promise, and thinking about what we can do to support our graduates in a guarantee, right, into a pathway for all of our kids at Foster High School. So anyway, those are things that we're thinking about, and we've been talking about. We have one of the other board members that's also on the Tukwila Children's Foundation, and we've been talking about that as well. So, but that's good feedback around the high school. If it worked in elementary, it should work in high school. So that's something we'll
if I
take
wind
into.
it back just a hair, there is a teacher at Foster High School now who teaches half a dozen classes, and you can take a class on how to start your own business, how to manage your finances, right? These are tangible tasks, these are life skills. I'm suggesting that you work with her to have them actually start a nonprofit, or maybe a business that is a fundraising business.
It's interesting. I love it.
'Cause
It's a good idea. We have a couple of the Foster High School teachers probably right here listening, going, I'm going to go back to my school and think about that. That sounds like a great idea. I look at somebody just wrote in, great idea. There we
Because
go.
it would be a great thing to put on their resume.
I think it's great.
You
Yeah,
could talk
no,
about
I think that's a great
percentages.
idea, even to have a project, right? The project idea. All
Okay,
right.
sorry.
No, you're fine. No, you're fine. Anybody else? I just want to make sure we let anyone else.
This is Sharon. I'd just like to introduce myself. I work for the Dispute Resolution Center of King County, and we have a 3-year grant to do peer mediation at Foster and Showalter currently. And next year is our 3rd year of the grant. Before that, we had a 4-year grant through Best Starts for Kids and King County funding. And so we're hoping that we can apply for another one. And we also want to, work with the school as best we can to provide more opportunity for the peer mediators. So I just wanted to make myself known and say that I'm really concerned about how this is happening. All our peer coordinators are leaving because we hire people who are recently, or we give stipends to coordinators who have recently been hired, and they won't be here next year.
What are they won't be here next year because they're
One is a librarian, Maggie Shea is leaving, and then the other is social emotional
Mhm.
support in
Got it.
Showalter.
Yeah, got it. I understand. All right.
Uh-huh.
All right. Thank you, Sharon. Maybe you can email
Yeah.
me. We can talk about that. That'd be
Okay,
good.
that would be great. Thank you.
Yep. Yep. In fact, I got the email today regarding the
Right,
Rosalie.
I sent that, and then I was just also wondering about so the social worker in the high school is going to be leaving also, because we were thinking about trying to recruit her.
Yes, she's actually, yes, she's not going to be.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, but I would work
Thank
with the
you.
principal. So what I would do is work with the principals and they can work with you on the recruitment efforts.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. All right. And are there any other questions for us right now that we can answer? It's funny because I always start at 6:30 and I think, oh, we're gonna have a lot of time to talk. And then I think, oh, and then the time goes and I'm like, oh my. All right, I'm gonna look then to see if we have any other things to add in terms of the budget. Just trying to add anything else that I want to make sure that we have like I said, we put the link to the budget information sheet. Trying to make sure I just capture any hands up for anybody else. I know people probably are hungry or want to get home. I just want to make sure. Well, I'll just show, we have Renee. Go ahead, Renee.
Excuse me. I have a question. So specifically at Foster High School, there are a few positions that have been non-renewed, and those positions last week or earlier this week were posted as being open. And I wonder if the district is attempting to hire people who are lower on the salary schedule. Are you trying to hire bachelor level people instead of master level people? And is that a disservice to our students? Or are you trying to hire P1s over continuing contracts so that potentially we could have these budget cuts again next year? I'm worried about the impact to our students.
Yeah.
And I'm worried about how individuals who have made a considerable impact for students are being cut for monetary reasons.
Well, first of all, we can't do that. They can't, we have to follow our bargaining agreement. I didn't know about that. I don't know if that was an error, but I have to follow up with the human resources because
No, what we're doing is we're following the rules of the bargaining agreement. And so HR has been working closely with the union to go through the steps that we have to take for positions in the district. So that is what's happening with all of the schools at this moment.
So if you have a question about that, I would talk to your union president and talk to her about that process. But that's not our intent to, there's never, our intention is to always follow the collective bargaining agreement to the best that we can with the timelines that we have listed. So, but I would talk to your union president on that question specifically.
All right, I just want to noted that my concern is for students and the loss of educators who have been there for them, believed in them, and committed to them. And we're losing a lot of really great people.
Yep.
And I worry that we're going to fill those positions with less qualified individuals.
Thank you. I see Tara has a comment in the chat that says several districts added furlough days for admin at the very start to keep the cuts as far away as possible as the classroom. Yeah, so one of the things that we did that we don't have a large number of district administrators. I think the total number is, I can't remember. And we looked at that. Our total impact of dollars we're looking is about, I'm trying to think, it's about We have the 3 point, which she said, and then there's the ESSER funds, which is 5.6, which we have to eliminate. And then we also have our interfund loan, which is $3 million. So those are all the things that we're considering. I think we have only 12 district administrators. And so we would have to, if we, there's not, for furlough days, we are looking at that, but we're trying to see if we can get an agreement with some of our members to figure out if we can do more, what we could do together. But we're not, and we were talking about that, but we don't have a lot of to pull from. When we did an analysis, I think it was, I can't remember what the number was, but we'll look at that again. I mean, we can look at that again, but we have talked about it, but it's not as significant. When we looked at the math, even like doing, I think we looked at doing 3 furloughs for the year or 5. It was about, I think we looked at, I can't remember what the cost analysis was, but we looked at that. We have looked at that. And we have to actually, to have the reach that we have for the impact of dollars that we have, we would have to actually do beyond even the district administrators. It would have to be more. But thank you for that comment. We'll go back to the table. All right, it's 7:27. I'm gonna stop recording. I want to thank everyone for being here. If we're going to have a work session on June 11th, Tuesday, June 11th, from 3 to 5 o'clock, we're going to be talking about the budget again and some of the budget decisions that have been made and what the mitigation planning is moving forward. It's not going to be the entire budget, so just letting everyone know to manage expectations, but it is going to be, we're going to be talking about 60% of the budget discussions, and we're going to be doing that on June 11th, and it'll be available on Zoom. I want to thank everyone here for being here at this meeting. Please go ahead and email us or contact us if you have any further questions or there's things that you've thought about. And I'm happy to continue to engage if this is helpful for people. So I'm going to turn off the recording.